6:30. I want y'all welcome y'all to the Smithfield Town Council and the Planning Commission meeting tonight. Michael, do you want to take the upcoming meetings, or do you want me to just breeze through that and then we go to density?
They are there for informational purposes, so just so everybody's aware of what's upcoming.
Sure.
Yes.
Thank you. Then we go to density. Tammy, is that you?
This was requested from the Planning Commission, so I'll go ahead and defer to them.
Okay, thank you.
Well, then I'll start off because I kind of asked to have this joint meeting because, as we all know, a lot of the elections in November were all based off of previous decisions that were made concerning development across the county and the town. And a lot of campaigns were run about how much they're against development. And really, I just want to know your expectations. We're your commission. We're appointed by y'all. We're the first shot at a lot. Well, we're the second shot. Planning director gets the first shot. But, you know, we need to have clear expectations of what y'all expect of us, density-wise, sort of figuring out with developers where they are before they ever get to us. You know, whether we're going to honor all these waivers and special use permits and how your feelings are about those, these density requirements and what y'all's expectations are. And that's really what we need to know in order to say your development looks great, but it's not going to fly because you've got 6 waivers and special use permits. And so, you know, I think really staff needs to know where the direction is going first, because they're going to head off a lot of the development and answer the questions of the developer before they ever get to us, before we ever get to this. And so, as I mentioned in our last Planning Commission meeting, how strictly are we going to enforce these ordinances? Are these guidelines, or are these restrictions, and we are going to abide them by the way it's written? And that needs to be dictated to us, or whatever the right word is, to say where are we going with this and how we're doing that. And so then the discussions for the rest of the night are going to be based around how strict are we going to be. And that's what I want to hear from Mr. Cutler, Ms. Beavermeyer, Mr. Harris, who've been elected and done. I guess Mr. Brooks too, because he's been fairly vocal about a lot of this development. But I want to know how we're going to proceed and the decisions. I've been on the Planning Commission, I think, the 12th year. So I've had a lot to do with these decisions that have made, and y'all, they've been very unfavorable with y'all, and I just want to know why, what's going on, and what are we going to do for the future to help curtail what it is that y'all been elected to do.
I'd like to comment on that, Tom. The reason why, and I'm glad you called this meeting, is because you're exactly right. Everybody needs to get on board about where council wants to go with the future of Smithfield and with the explosion, I call it an explosion, of this town. I've been here all my life. I might have lived in Suffolk for a while, but my business was still active in Alaway County. And when I came back, I saw a need that to continue to be on council if possible. And I have been. I've been on it 12 and a half years now. And so what I feel like is that we, and I've said this before, and I've said it during our campaigns, we need to slow this down. I mean, to me, when you got 4 developments and 800 homes, 200 homes, 60 homes, whatever it may be, it just seems all of a sudden overwhelming. And for a developer to come in and ask for 8 special use permits on one small project, it's concerning to me, and I think it's concerning the town council and the newly elected officials. And they've presented that to me, and I understand that. So I feel like that tonight, yes, we need to give somebody some direction and some ideas about where we want to go, and can we just start looking at things and controlling our growth. I really feel like right now it's out of control. We don't have but so many square acres left in the town of Smithfield. I want to see this done correctly and right, and make it an enhanced neighborhood as it always has been. So that's, and they can speak on my behalf or not my behalf. They can say whatever they want to, but that's how I feel about it. So if you guys have any comments about this tonight, I'd like for you to address that now to them.
Yeah, Tom, great idea. I'm glad we're all here because it just seems like there's a lot of confusion sometimes, and we, for 6 years sitting out there and then watching you guys struggle with it. Um, Obviously, a new guy, but certainly not new to doing the research and having an opinion and looking at it, and I'm in the process of attending the Planning Commission seminar, or study group, or whatever that thing is in Richmond. Great that you tapped on the notebook, because that's sort of like where I would like to start. Sitting out there, my expectation has always been, as a citizen looking in, that Tammy and Michael, the first thing that they're going to do is look at the zoning regulations as written. So, sort of to you guys first. And and last night was a perfect example with Mr. Mullen, not knowing. I know you told him, because I know how thorough you guys are. But he couldn't get a grip around why 112 wasn't the same as 108 because of the different footprints and things. We would like to have the professional staff, when the application first comes to you guys, when somebody buys some land and they come to you, you say, here it is, here are the zoning parameters established through a tremendous amount of hard work. I watched you guys do this when you wrote all this stuff and applauded every one of them. The first sieve has to be you guys. We would really like it better if it comes in and says, okay, you've got 18 acres. What are you looking at building? You go into multi, here's how many units our zoning law allows you to do. You go in single family here, and make sure that they stay within the parameters that are already in the books. If we don't like what's in the books, then let's have that discussion and go back and change it. But what is in position now is and again, this is me, I know I'm talking for the other four candidates ran together, because obviously we beat this to death. And then it would come to you guys, okay? Which leads us to what Mike was just saying, 6, 8, 9 special use permits. Just on the face of that's a problem. Our zoning laws are so poorly written that it encourages this, and they're not. Or there is some sense on the part of developers that they can come in and circumvent what we have already put in front of them by using this, this, and this. For me, and again, I'm sure they'll chime in, a special use permit is exactly that. It's not something that should happen by right or on a regular basis. And it should be the obligation of the applicant to show why that is necessary and how it benefits the town. If the only reason that somebody is offering up a special use permit is to decrease setbacks, for instance, and therefore increase density, that's not something that your new council is going to look favorably on. We'd like to stay within the zoning regulations that are in place. Be mindful of special use permits. You've handled a couple, and you've used words like, I love that one you used on
Cluttered.
cluttered. Yeah, cluttered was the good one, but you also said, and we can use this special permit to, maybe form, and it works to everybody's advantage. That's the type of special use permit that we would like for you guys to manage that and send forward to us. This corner lot's too small, it doesn't fall into it. Okay, we make, you work with the guy and you send it forward. But to Mike's comment, gosh, 5 years now, virtually everybody who has submitted a development has started with a ridiculous number well outside the printed material. And I'm not a developer, I'm a daggum history teacher, but it's just stunning to wonder where they're coming from. They know, these people aren't stupid, right? They're not stupid. Amazingly how smart they are when you sit here and listen to them talk. But if I'm the developer, substitute the word gambler if you'd like, because they're taking a gamble They're buying the property and they're gonna try to make a product, through which they can make money. They're completely entitled to do that. But they come before us one after the next and play like they don't know what the rule was when they bought the land. So I guess what I'm saying is, and on the density thing, is that we have excellent zoning regulations in place. Let's make the first step of any process coming in within the parameters there, again, to you guys pretty much first. And then if there is some justifiable special use permit that a developer can explain and justify that will benefit the town and its citizens first, and the developer as well. I mean, that's a reason that he would come for them. And those are something that we could look at to help, again, it might have been Tom's word, help control or help, massage things into place. We're in a pretty interesting place in Smithfield right now. We don't have to build another house. The county's doing it for us in terms of, rooftops and where people can live. I'm gonna say it wrong, I always say it. Sweetwater, right? Sweetgrass, 600. Mallory's coming in at 8. The promontory looks like downtown DC. So we can be, at this point, selective and controlled. And when you hear us say controlled, that's not saying no. We're saying, absolutely. You want to buy that plot of land, you want to give us a product that fits within the parameters that are already in place. Bring that thing on, Obviously, we need some houses. One of the things we say constantly, all of us during the campaign, we also need significant more commercial, amenity, restaurant type space, economic development type things. And you will find, I think, that, the newbies 100% behind that. But we met, virtually hundreds, maybe even thousands of people. We did 14 or 15, neighborhood visits. We held Q&A, and almost to a person, the two things that people told us over and over and over again: slow it down, don't spend our money. So, opening salvo on density from one of your newbies.
I'm going to piggyback off of what Mike and Bill said too. First of all, I want to say to the Planning Commission, I appreciate where you guys are coming from, because you guys really get in the weeds and the details, and that is very important for us, that all that is vetted. And so I appreciate what, the thoroughness that you guys have put into all that. What I want to add to Bill Harris's comments regarding the SUPs specifically is that there's a reason they're called a special use permit, is that it should be used in special cases, like a corner lot, like Dr. Pope, you've even talked about, instances where we have 2 auto parts stores that are next to each other. It could have been used something like that. There are reasons for them. So I would never say never, that's not the point. But it's when they're used as a blanket for a whole development, it's no longer special. It's kind of like everyone gets a trophy, everyone gets a special use permit. It's not, it shouldn't be like that. It should be used for special cases within a development, sure, or within certain individual properties, that sort of thing. So that's where I think we've gotten ourselves in trouble, is that the special use permits have benefited the developers instead of benefiting the town. And that's where I think it can be both, but I think we're here to protect Smithfield and represent Smithfield, not necessarily represent the developers. So even on, Tammy and Michael, you guys do a great job with talking people, making sure they understand what the rules are, what the zoning is. But I think it's okay to say, when a developer comes to us and says, I want to do this and this and this, and you say, I don't think that's going to fly with the council. Just giving you a heads up, so they don't spend a bunch of money making up these plans that we're going to vote no on. I mean, that's no fun for anybody. So I think we just need to be realistic in that sense, is that there isn't, and this comes from the will of the voters. I mean, we have talked to, I mean, I stood outside the early voting for weeks, every single day, and talked to thousands of voters. I don't know, thousands, over 1,000. I mean, a lot. And there really were 2 or 3 people that said, oh yeah, we need some more houses. I mean, mostly what people wanted was more restaurants, more shopping, more entertainment. That's what they want, and we're okay with that. We want the commercial development, brings goods and services and jobs to the area. That's what our focus should be. I was happy to see that with the promontory, that's what they're going to do first. They're going to put in the commercial aspect of it, and I think that's great. We've tried to move the Grange in that direction, more commercial aspect rather than more houses. We have a lot of housing that is coming, not only within Smithfield, but even right outside of Smithfield, Ben's Grant, St. Luke's, you know, Sweetgrass, Sweetgrass, Sweetwater, whatever it is. All those. So I think that's where we have come into it, because we've heard from the citizens, and that's what they want. We also want to support local businesses, and in that sense, I think we can support them. There are times where somebody needs an exemption, a special use permit for something, and that's okay. We're supporting a local business, but in terms of a whole development, I think that's where we really have had issues with it.
Evening. I don't know where to start. I know you want direction, but the only direction I really want to give you, this is coming from me, I'm not speaking for the council, is I want you to be the best commissioner you can be. I want you to thoroughly look at everything like you have done and go by the rules of our municipal code and our zoning laws. That's what I want. Whether you like them or not, that's what we have. Were they boilerplated many, many years ago, like we talked about last night? Who cares? This is what we got to deal with. And I think you've done a very good job of doing that. The fact that these developers are coming in with so many requests, well, it's in the rule book, so if they have to make a request, we don't have to honor the request. We don't like that. I wish Darren was on the call here. He actually has a T-shirt that says, "Don't Suffolk up Isle of Wight County," and I think that's a perfect motto for "Don't Suffolk up." Have you been to North Suffolk? You've been down Bridge Road?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what we're trying to avoid, and I think that's the biggest fear is all that pressure. And yes, I'm one of those guys that moved from Virginia Beach after 30 years. I'm one of those guys. But we don't want to see that amount of development coming in like that. We're congested already. We do have a charming downtown district, which we have done a very good job protecting, and I think it needs to be protected. It's what this town is known for. It's why I chose to move here. I love it. Now, Mayor Smith is correct. This was like an explosion. I came in at the very end of Mallory Scott, and that's really what started my interest in looking around and going like, boy, I really missed a fight here. And then Pierceville came up. That's what really got me going. So I started learning about what was happening here. And now we have, 3 on the table, another one probably behind it, I'm thinking. And I think that's where the fear came from. It's like, Jesus, we've got to stop this. We have to slow that train. I think that's where that's coming from. I don't want you to feel, again, this is coming from me, I don't want you to feel like there's any animosity at all about what you're doing, because I don't feel like that. I think you do a fine job. And your job is to clear out the weeds. You're supposed to clear the weeds, I guess, for us to say, this is a good project, it's not a good project. It's a good project except for that. That's what I'm looking for. I don't have the time, the energy, the knowledge to be able to go through every single project on my own to decide if I should vote yes or no. I think a lot of that, we're a team. That team needs to do the work. And that's what I'm looking for, more so than anything. And, going back to the number of special use permits, if that's what these guys feel like they need to ask for, then they're going to ask for it. And it's nothing against them at all. I understand they're in business to make money. I'm in business to make money too. I don't like doing practice. I don't like losing money. I want to make the best money I can on whatever that project is or whatever that move is or whatever that scenario is. So I hope this is a good start for the discussion.
Well, what is it about Mallory Point you don't like?
Just, I saw it's a good question.
All of you, I mean, this is for all of you.
Yeah, I saw the amount of opposition when I first moved here, and boy, were people riled up. And I didn't know the backstory of it all. So I started to go back just on my own, going like, what's happening? What are all these orange signs? What is all this? And when I saw the amount of public outcry, and then the vote when it went down, that to me sounded like a problem. Do I have a problem with that development? I don't. But I saw, and I can say that after the fact. If I was here and I was going through, I may have a different, but it's 50-50 for me. It is or it isn't. That's a great area for housing. I think it serves a great need. So, I don't have a high opinion on it one way or the other, Tom. You guys were here. I don't have any more thoughts on it.
Yeah, my principal problem with Mallory from day one, and you probably remember I was at a lot of those meetings, was the density, the number of units that was allowed in there. I actually think Napolitano did what we've been talking about this evening. He came forward with a lot of stuff up front. He's been at the other meetings quite out front and not overly asking, but when the process was going on, there were two things that I tried to follow. I spoke about. One was the number of units, and the other were the reduction in setback along the little creeks and things back there. We gave up some land back there for little crabs and birds and stuff, whatever. I forget the phrase for that back there. But that's got a nice mix. I hope it continues to grow well.
Any other comments on Mallory?
Yeah, I do. I voted no against it. I think you know that. And the reason why I did was because of the public outcry. I've never seen anything like that before. Sitting on council for all these years, it's been pretty calm. And when they came up and spoke that time, I'll never forget it as long as I live. The chief was sitting over there and was looking at the mayor at that time and said, "Do you want me to slow this down?" He said, he held it down. That's what's important to me, is that we've got to listen to our citizens. We have been elected by them. If we don't listen to them, we don't need to be up here. And for us to appoint people on the planning commission, you are a reflection of us. And that means that we've all got to work together. I agree with everybody saying, y'all do a great job. I don't want to get in the weeds with all this stuff y'all do. I'm telling you, you really do. I see the time y'all spend with it and the heartaches and everything else you have to do. But my biggest complaint is that, well, not a complaint, but just a concern, is that this is not what I want to see this town to be. Even if it grows, it's going to grow to a point that we can control it and it looks like Smithfield. They keep calling us a little Williamsburg. Well, if we keep doing what we're doing, we're not going to be that. We're going to just be another little town that got inundated with developers, and that's the end of it. And I said it before, we've got little square footage. We don't have much. And Isle of Wight is doing what they want to do around us, and we have no control of that. We might have a comment that's brought up to Tammy and Michael that we can interject some things, but obviously they don't pay a whole lot of attention to that because they had a complete different vote. Their planning commission did not want street grass, and what did they do? They voted it in. It was a shock to me, it really was. And so, and again, I'm gonna reiterate what they're saying. This is not about us being mad. It's about us, what can we do to make this whole process more congenial to our community and a better place to live?
Ms. Beaver-Meyer, do you want to comment before I make a couple statements? Would you like to comment on Mallory or anything, or do?
That's kind of what got me started in, I guess, paying attention to what was going on. You know, I was at home raising kids, so I was not paying attention as much as a lot of people were. So, but I did with Mallory, and probably as Jeff said, it is a good place for housing, that's fine, but I was concerned about the density. That was my main objection to it, is that there were just too many houses.
Okay.
That was it.
Ms. Bullard, any comments?
No, Dr. Pope, I don't really have, my purpose for being here tonight is listening, because I don't necessarily agree with some of the special use permit comments. And being part of the Old Town Council, I'm feeling some kind of way about the comments that are being made. I feel like I've been incompetent in making decisions for the town. However, before not necessarily Mallory, but when the Grange came before us, in order to be able to help me to make a decision, I had outside meetings with a friend of mine who is, she's retired now. She was a planner. And my comment was, when we approve special use permits, are we showing preferential treatments to the developer? And she said it's not unusual for a developer to ask for special use permits. And it's up to us to decide. I would come to planning commission meetings primarily to hear the conversations that take place here, knowing that eventually that the project is going to come back to us. And so it kind of gives me some background of the discussion before it gets to us. I vividly remember you saying you have no problem with special use permits because it gives us the opportunity to have a more in-depth conversation to be able to make a decision about a project. So I look at special use permits a little bit differently than the new council whom they campaign on. So I don't really have a problem with it. It's up to us to say no. Bill alluded to the class that they're taking in Richmond. It's really interesting when I was in that class and they talked about the comprehensive plan. I made a call to Tammy and I said, Tammy, when a project comes before you, what are some of the first things that you do? And she mentioned the comprehensive plan. I said, okay, you got an A+ for that. But I think Michael and Tammy do a very good job in vetting projects when they come to us. They can give the developer their opinion, but it's not really their job to say yes or no. That's what y'all's job is. And so that was one reason why I had concerns with Mullins being here last night. I'm used to the discussion taking place with y'all first. I don't really know the ins and outs that planning does. So I didn't have a whole lot of questions to ask him on last night, other than the options that he offered. The one with the least number of units, put him in the density, and density right there seems to be a 4-letter word with any developer that comes before us. Now, Mallory Scott, I voted for Mallory Scott. I thought that Napolitano did a very good job in trying to listen to us and make adjustments with some things that we wanted. But at the time, I don't know if it's been 3 years ago now that project was approved, he promised some affordable housing. I'm a proponent of affordable housing, and at that time, his duplexes and townhouses were starting at $225. You can't buy anything in Smithfield or Isle of Wight at that price now. My disappointment is that the duplexes and townhouses were not in his first phase. And Wellington Estates dictated that because they said that they wanted comparable houses to theirs across from them. Now, time has gone by, the real estate market has evolved, so I don't really know what that price point is going to be when the duplexes and townhouses started. I also look at the crowd a little bit differently. To try to justify, I didn't really make any comments after that, but I actually went through that ledger, people that signed up for the public comments, to determine who was from Smithfield and who was from Isle of Wight. There is a close overlap here, but the number of people that actually spoke out during that Mallory Scott was not the majority of the people here in the town, so I looked at it a little bit differently. I was born and raised here in Smithfield, and I would never do anything to jeopardize my lifestyle here. My parents live here, my sisters live here, so I wouldn't do anything deliberately to do anything that would affect this community in a negative manner. And amid all the stuff that's taken place now, social media takes on a life of its own, and that's how I'm feeling about my position on town council right now.
Gotcha.
Since special use permits have come up so much, I know how, I think it would be beneficial in your comments if you talk about how planning commission views those and potentially why the system is set up with so many in it.
All right,
I think that may
I'll
be
discuss that.
beneficial. Okay.
Thank you. I just want to remind you, our suburban residential ordinances, there are two different types of developments in suburban residential, what I'll call regular, which is 3 units per acre, and cluster allows for 4.5 units per acre, but you have to have more open space. That's our suburban, so correct me, Tammy, Mark, if I say anything incorrect. So based on what you just said, Mallory Point should have been approved hands down. The development acreage was 812 homes over 497 acres. He originally proposed 1,200 plus homes. His net, after all of this was done, his single-family or suburban residential thing came in at 2.77 houses per acre. His attached residential came in at 3.89 houses per acre. He's well below the density requirements of our ordinances. His special use permits did not ask for more density. His special use permits were, he had to have a special use permit to do cluster development, which is what he asked for instead of traditional. He had to have a zoning map amendment, which I don't he had a rezoning. He had to have a parking and loitering waiver because he didn't want RV parking. If he put RV parking in, he would have gotten rid of that, but he didn't want RV parking. We had to allow suburban residential cluster subdivision. We had to allow suburban residential community buildings. He wanted non-contiguous open space. In cluster, we wanted one big open space is the way the ordinance is written, but he wanted to have pockets of open space based on his land development. And he wanted to increase his residential building height from 35 feet to 45 feet because of his things. He never asked for an increase in density, and he's well below our guidelines. So when everybody's screaming and yelling about Mallory Point being 812 homes, it's 812 homes over 500 acres, 812 units over 500 acres, and he's well below density, well below density. And so it's the number of 812 homes in our town, not 812 homes over 500 acres. That's why we weren't worried, at least I'll speak for myself, I'm not worried about density on that project because he was more than willing to cut density and give up RPA space and keep that so it could not be touched by the homeowners back to the creek. And there was a lot of concessions and a lot of things he did road development wise and the traffic circle wise. So he was actually well within that. The Grange, on the other hand, he's well within, and this is the original Grange, not whatever's been known, because I haven't even seen the new part of the Grange. But on his single family units, he's at 2.9 units. Remember, our ordinance is either 3 or 4.5. His multifamily units were 7.72, and multifamily residential would be 12 units. What messes us up on the Grange is part of this, why I think the ordinances are not exactly right and why we need to readdress this. Multifamily residential to me means a townhome, a duplex, triplex, condo, where you've got 2 or 3, 4 buildings next to each other. But we applied multifamily residential to a large apartment building that was 3 stories high or 4 stories high. And then that got his density to 34 units, 38 units per acre, because you went up. And so we need to come up with a new multifamily residence ordinance that addresses high-rises, not condos and townhouses. Townhouses and condos are probably reasonable at 12. Then we look at promontory and say, are we or are we not? I don't remember. I've got the book here to look that up. But that's where we got messed up on the Grange, is because we don't have a separate division for high-rise. I'm going to call it high-rises. Let's just say it that way because I don't know what we're going to call it. But that's what messed us up on density at the Grange. And that's what got everybody upset. But he was below the density requirements for single-family and multifamily residential, at least for his duplexes and things like that, but it was the high-rise that got us messed up. When we look at Wellington Estates is developed at 2.5 houses per acre, and everybody finds that acceptable, but 2.7 is not. It's just not consistent. Cypress Creek, I got the information from Jim Parks. They're built out at 1.1 units per acre in Cypress Creek. And that's taking the golf course out of the calculation. So they're at 1.1, Wellington Estates is at 2.5, Mallory Point's at 2.7, and the Grange single-family residential was at, whatever I just said, 2.9 or whatever it was. But, so they're not far off, except for the high-rise part of this, and that's part of the ordinance that we can't change in the middle of the developer's presentation. But it needs to be addressed of what are we going to do with high-rise buildings, or at least concentrated density buildings. I don't know, because that's what at least got us messed up. So that's part of the density issue. The other issue with the downtown neighborhood residential density doesn't make any sense. We allow for the minimum acre, so you either have I think it's written as multifamily or single family, but multifamily, you have to have 5,000 square feet of a lot. If you have a single family, if it's a corner, it's 6,000. If it's an interior lot, it's 4,000. But when you calculate the density for that over the acre, a single family residential comes out to like 7.8 units per acre, and then the other one comes out to 10, and our unit limits it at 5. How do we get to a 5 density in the downtown neighborhood residential when our lot sizes don't even correlate with the actual calculation? So I think people, I don't know who wrote these, I don't know anything about them, but they don't make sense. Nobody's done the math on it. And then when you start to sit down and do the math on it, and then you have Mr. Corolla coming in and asking to do a little bit of a development, a redevelopment, he's well within the density if you're going to go apply the square footage issues, but he's not if you're just going to take the 5 units per acre. So a lot of this doesn't make any sense, and some of this stuff needs to be looked at, and we need to look at this in a density area and say, do these numbers even make sense? Which gets you back to special use permit. Because the reason O'Reilly shows up is because they didn't have to have a special use permit. We can't tell them no when they meet all of the zoning requirements. And so the only thing we can say is we don't want you to put a pink sign up. All we want is earth colors and all that, but we can't stop them. So they end up with 2 auto parts stores next to each other. The only way we have a legal, Mr. Riddick, the only way we have a legal right to tell them no is because they have to apply for a special use permit. So the more restrictive we are and the more special use permits we get, the more say we have into their project. The more we can say, I don't like 1,200 homes, give us a new number. And that number got cut down to 812, which is a much more reasonable density number than what 1,200 was originally there. And so the special use permits don't bother me because they give us that. But the other reasons we have special use permits are for special use permits. Pick on vape shops. You have to have a special use permit for that. You have to have a special use permit if you're going to have a home daycare center, because we got to make sure it matches. If you're going to do an Airbnb, does it make sense for the location at which it's in its town? Those are special case by cases. But if the more broad we leave this, and when they meet the criteria, all we can say is, thanks for your development, yes, because we don't have say in that. And if we give up the special use permits, and the reason they have so many of them is, it's because it might be a lot of dumb things, which is what happened in Mallory Point to get you to the 6 special use permits, but those special use permits didn't amount to anything, in my opinion. But the other issue is of the PMUD development, the other inconsistency is we don't really have a density calculation for their single-family residential and for their attached residentials. It's left very open, which allows them to have these big wide swings in density. So the inconsistency is in the downtown neighborhood residential, is in the PMUD. I don't think the suburban residentials are far off in that sense. I think our attached residential and our multifamily residentials are decent, but I think we really have to look at it as a high rise. I really haven't looked at all of the commercial stuff, but I just don't see that we have a whole lot of commercial development left. And then the other thing that Mr. Cutler had said at one of the meetings, and something that I think should be in our ordinance, is I am not in favor of going into the downtown neighborhood residential and say, I'm going to take this home down and put 3 in its place. I think that should be clear in our ordinance that we are not going to stand for just demolishing sections of homes just in order to get more land so we can put more density. If you're going to take a home down, put a home back, but you're not going to take a home down and say, oh good, now I've got 2 acres, I can put 10 units on that acre. I'm certainly not going to stand for demolishing it. But when you look at Mr. Corrales' project, very different. Open land, he's not demolishing anything. Why are we beating him up about density when everything in the downtown neighborhood residential is very appropriate for what he's asking for? So I don't think our numbers are off. I think our multifamily residential, our downtown neighborhood residential, and our PMUD need to be a little bit better defined on what we're going to allow for density and how those developments are going to be used. That's my first thing on those things.
Michael, can I get you to go back over for a little bit last night, Tom? We were chuckling when we were talking about the overlay and who did them and who wrote them. We only did about 2 hours on that last night. We couldn't figure out any of the stuff for downtown. But last night you took 4 or 5 minutes and spoke to the specific way that we control units within the PMUD now, right? Where if it's a single family, it has to follow.
Right, because the way we do that, and Tammy knows the nuts and bolts better than I do, but we don't look at it as a whole project. It's the little pieces of it. So where there's single-family residential, you have to comply with those single-family residential requirements. Where there's multifamily, you have to comply with those multifamily requirements. So the underlying zoning requirements for the uses still apply. It's just now you get to have the entire project be one unified zoning district. So otherwise you'd have to go say, all right, for this piece of the parcel we want single-family residential zoning, for this piece we want multifamily. It allows you to do one zoning district for the entire property, but the underlying regulations still apply to the uses, which gets complicated. Especially when you're trying to mix it together, which is kind of what it's for, is so you can have a mix of housing types. You can have commercial mixed with residential. And then it just gets a little complicated because then you have to look at each use on each certain piece of the property and apply those underlying regulations, which can get kind of complicated.
Go ahead.
I can explain. This was done on purpose because the world changes and.
Oh, no, I understand that particularly, but not everybody heard it last night.
Because of the trend in development in the world was mixed use, live work. That's what everybody said we needed to do. And we had consultants that came in and said, you people are so far behind. What you have will never permit what everybody wants, and that is the walkability. You live someplace and you can walk to the restaurant on the corner, that sort of thing. And they said, you need a mixed use development. And so that's the PMUD, it's pretty that's what it said. And that's how it all came about. And we hired a consultant to do all this. And we said, look, you need to give developers the flexibility, the ability to come in and say, this is what I want to do. Is this okay? Do you like it? And that's what the whole process with the grants was, is do you like this? Because then you can move the pieces around on the chessboard, so to speak, and put it together. And that's why it was that way. And so without the special use permits, you couldn't make it work, because if you make a strict application of all the rules from this district and this district without giving flexibility, you can't put them next to each other. And that's how it evolved. And so the reason for all the special use permits was to permit the flexibility that everybody said we should have in order to get this kind of development. And now special use permits, they're evil, and I get it. But it's not like they didn't intend it to be that way. And with the idea that we're going to let people get away with everything, it was just a tool to let the planning commission deal with a comprehensive development. And so it wasn't intended that we're going to give people, certain breaks against this, for this and for that. And Dr. Pope just said, in the case of Melbourne, we granted a whole bunch of special use permits, but they really didn't deal with density, it didn't deal with anything like that. It's just the ability for the developer to craft his development to suit his piece of property in a way that he thought was the best way to do it. So that's the history. And we did not make it up. We hired consultants that came in, and the planning commission worked on it for months and months and months. And the council went over it, and at the time, that's the thing that was important, because we, based on the information that we got from public consultants, we were behind the curve with everything. So that's how it happened.
And I guess the two things that I'll add is most mixed-use developments or planned mixed-use developments that I've seen other places are far more lenient than ours. I think ours is really, we have a lot of control. And to Bill's point, if somebody comes in with, 8 special use permits, planning commission and council have the ability to say, we like all of them except for this one, we're going to deny that one. And so we've done that with some with height, for example. We've said, well, no, we really don't like that height, so we'll approve it at this height. It gives you the control to manipulate different pieces of the project instead of having the boilerplate say, no, the project's bad because we didn't like how tall that building was. You now have the control to say, we like everything, but you're not building a building that tall. And so, I think that's why planning commission set it up that way, is so they can have comments on every piece. And it, frankly, it does make developers come in and apply for a lot of special use permits. But that's exactly what the planning commission wanted when they set it up that way.
I think y'all went to the planning conference, and you said, somebody told you that, we never make special use permits. Well, I think maybe it was Dan that said that. The feedback was, I haven't seen any special use permits since I've been on the planning commission. Well, localities like that, they have much more broad ordinances. You can do so much more under the terms of their ordinances than we can do by right under ours. And so they don't need them. They don't need them because they can do whatever they want to under the framework of the basic ordinance. Ours is much tighter. It was designed to be that way because of all the things, Mayor Smith said, we want to keep things tightly controlled. And I know, I'm sure this sounds unbelievable to everyone, but it was designed with the idea of giving the town council and the planning commission the control, the ability to really say yes and no over stuff. That's why it is the way it is. We've done a lousy job of explaining it to anybody, but it's kind of work.
I'm going to make 2 comments. Yes, to a citizen or a council member who was a citizen prior to, yes, horrible explanation to the general public. What you just said made a lot more sense. And 2, seems to be a little defensive or misunderstanding. I, for one, am not pointing any fingers or laying any blame on anything that you all have done in the past. Absolutely not. Our job is to react to what we were hearing. And there are a lot, Bill just gave, several good examples, and Tom and I have had conversations, about this. I can't get my daggum prescriptions and stuff. agree to this or agree to that. But the ones that we keep going back are hearing to us, just, setbacks. That's a tough one. That's, all you guys have been doing this a long time, it's no surprise to you, to get up wandering around the house, check your email at 10 o'clock, and somebody you've never heard of is bitching about setbacks, somewhere. And I'm going, not sure I signed up for that, but obviously I have. But it's things like that cause confusion, or, confusion to certain, why are we given setbacks here and a side back, and this, when to the public, for sure, all it looks like is we are creating the opportunity for that developer to build more, right?
And that,
You know what I'm saying? But that's just an example. We want to replicate. We keep talking about trying to protect, Smithfield houses that are only 6 feet apart with, I forget the exact numbers on the cottages, 22 feet backyards that are shared or something like that. Again, those are difficult things for people who live in houses that are 24, feet apart, as our zoning says. You're coming in, build all you want, but 24 feet apart. I'm having, I guess, my lack of connection time is, how is allowing that, agreeing to the setback for going from 25 to 5? How is that not just something that increases density, enriches the developer, and changes the look to what we already have in place?
and what I'll say is, unless you agree to something that increases the density, just reducing setbacks does not permit them to build more density. Because the density caps are still there. So unless you are adjusting the density numbers as well, some of it, and a lot of this was done when suburban sprawl was happening and all the lots were huge lots, houses way back up the road. The trend has been more to the traditional neighborhood design where houses are closer to the road, front porches, your neighbor. So a lot of stuff is moving towards that. And I just don't think our stuff's kept up with it. You very rarely see the big block subdivisions.
We had this conversation with the planning commission last month, and some of them probably will, but somebody asked me, how did we get where we are? Well, I've been here 40 years, I can't believe it, but 40 years ago, the dream was an acre lot. Everybody wanted an acre lot. And, and now people have acre lots, they don't like to cut all the grass, but you can't, nobody builds subdivisions with acre lots anymore because they can't afford it. The cost of building the infrastructure, it's not just the land itself, land's expensive, but the fact that you have to build that much road and that much water and that much sewer to serve the number of houses that you really want to build makes it unbelievably unaffordable for people in today's world. The prices on houses are crazy right now. It's just unbelievable. I don't know how young people do it.
Right.
But the fact that if you're not willing to permit the setbacks, to your point, Mr. Harris, about that's how people can come up with different types of housing products that perhaps can be more affordable. The zero lot line, that our ordinance doesn't make sense about a lot of it. I think a zero lot line is the lots, it's right on, it's like a townhouse and they're connected. There are iterations of development that are zero lot line, but they're not connected. And that's kind of a hard thing to explain to people, and Tammy does it better than I do, but those are the kind of tools that we've been hoping we could incorporate in order to come up with housing stock in the town of Smithfield that people can afford. Because everybody complains about it, there's nothing that people can buy.
Well, not trying to monopolize, but, and I understand exactly what you're saying. I'm going to go back to something Tom said. Opening. Why that is frustrating to those of us who, came in on this new ballot is that this is a setback that is within our zoning law right now. If it's so doggone odious and it's an interruption to properly moving forward, proper development and satisfying the things that you just said, then we need to go back and rewrite those things and get rid of that confusion so that it is not, at the very least, the perception of this constant battle of giving away stuff that's written down. So you're talking sort of in the, not the nebulae, but, you know, out there, this, and it's gonna make it better, this. I'm reading these things, you know, and I think, certainly not as much as Tom.
I
I've been
think
at his
that
house,
that's
but-
what
but
Tom
he's
has been
absolutely-
saying all along, is that our zoning ordinances need to be looked at. There are things that we can't control because they're not even there.
Right, no, that's what I'm saying. But we've been asked, as candidates now elected, to see if we can get everybody that's involved in it to do a better job of conforming with our own laws that are in place. And that's the frustration. If the answer to that frustration is for us to start over and rewrite these things, you know, then let's do that in a collegial and communal manner, you know, and blend some of these things. And we had this conversation last night, the residential downtown, talking about Benny stuff. I forget what the thing is, but anyway, he wants the amendment, so that he can, the text amendment, so that he can apply for, we all like Benny's project. You know, we've all told him that. But at the same time, there's at least a part of all of us that feel like, you know, we're up against that wall. Because for Benny to get what he's got to do, we've got to change the zoning, and then he's got to come back and request a special use permit, all of which seems contrary to what our zoning has established. Okay? No vote tonight would deny us that. Most of us would vote Vinnie's project if it fell into what, you know, what was there. Because that's what that's what we hear. That's what I'm hearing. And let's just, I got you, Tom, and just hypothetically, right? He gets the amendment. Vinnie makes the request. We give him the request. What keeps the guy that now owns the 2 acres that used to be the Gruber house right there? What prevents that guy from coming in tomorrow and building 4 and 5 houses right there? You know, how do I tell Vinnie, yes, you get it, and this guy does? It's an empty lot right now. I walked it yesterday. You know, it's right there. So it kind of already has on-street parking because James has on-street parking. You know, how do we turn around and say no to that guy when he says, well, you just gave Mr. Corollo this exact permit. I want to build 3 or 4 houses right here. It fits with this new thing. So, you know, we need your help. We need your ammunition. You're down in the weeds, I like that phrase. So that as town councilors, when it comes before us, you know, we understand all the vetting that you've done, and you help us, you know, vote that satisfies that particular issue as well as what happens after that issue. The double lot came up. That's not just a hypothetical. I had somebody ask me about that exact thing today. Somebody who is interested in buying that lot from the guy that owns it, if indeed we're going to improve that number of houses and lots downtown.
Well, for Vinnie's case, there's 2 issues. His zoning's not changing, is it? Okay, zoning's not changing. Every other ordinance has a provision in it that allows you to exceed maximum density. Downtown neighborhood residential does not, and that's the point of the text amendment, is to give people an avenue to at least explore that option. If you don't approve the text amendment, nobody can exceed the density, period. So it just gives them an opportunity that all the other ordinances allow, but for some reason it wasn't written in the downtown neighborhood residential ordinance to allow you to exceed density. Is that correct?
I'm trying to pull it up now. I don't think it's in neighborhood residential.
But I understand that's the reason for and we had to do that for, what was the other one, Mr. Bryan, was it the PMUD that we had to expand the text amendment on that at one point in order to allow for the density? But every other ordinance has a built-in mechanism for increased density except for DNR. So all this text amendment really was is, yeah, you can increase density, now present your project. But if we don't grant the text amendment, nobody can exceed the 5 units per acre. That's all that text amendment is.
No, I understand that part,
Okay.
but
So,
we
So-
give him the text amendment. He requests his density SUP, and we say yes.
okay.
Good
So-
project, fits well, all of those things.
So
What
here's-
do we say to the guy who comes back
Well-
and wants to build the 5 houses?
Here's my argument to that. Mr. Luter, gosh, I don't remember these data, bought 2.8 acres, I think. Close?
2.7, yes.
2.7 acres. Went to the town, said, this is what I want to do. I'm sure the town probably said, you need to extend Clay Street through. And they did something with the children's center, is that correct? Didn't he give a little bit of land to expand their parking lot, do something of that nature? So did you donate a little bit of land to that? And then he went to the VFW and said, we need to create a parking lot. All right, but I'm buying 2.7 acres, and I want to put 8 homes on it?
Yeah.
8 homes on it out of 2.7 acres. Great, you're in the density requirements, we'll extend it, we approve it. He decides to walk away from the project. Then he comes in and now has to base his project on 1.2 acres. If he would have bought the whole lot to begin with, the town would have said, you need to extend Clay Street through, you need to give your stuff to the children's center, and it'd be nice if you do this to the VFW, we'll let you base your denominator on 2.7, and Vinnie's within the density calculation, and therefore it's a moot point. But because the road is in there, the town now has to say, we have to penalize you at 1.2 acres, not 2.7. And I feel Vinnie's being in my opinion, only my opinion, that that's not the right denominator to apply to him. And so therefore, I think it's irrelevant. The new guy buying the property knows what's going on. It's not maybe it is raw land, maybe it isn't, but it's not the same. It's not an apples to apples comparison. And I don't know, that's as far as I'll say on why Mr. Luter walked away, but I think Vinnie should be able to base his denominator on 2.7, not 1.2.
I've heard you make that argument before, and to be honest, don't have a lot of problem with it, but I'm talking about the precedent that gets set.
Oh, right.
What do we do with that guy?
You can say no.
That's right.
You can always say
If the guy
no.
comes in and
Yeah.
goes, I want to do the same thing, I want my special use permit, you can say, no, that's not the right place. Because it's not it's not, like, in Vinnie's project is surrounded on 3 sides by town streets. And the Gruber property, the old quality property, it's not. And you could say, well, it's inappropriate because it doesn't have good access, it doesn't have utilities, it doesn't have any of these things. And you could say, this is not the right place, and it's okay to say no.
That's the beautiful thing about zoning cases, every project stands on its own merit. And as long as you're not being arbitrary and capricious, you can say no to anything you want to say no to. So you don't have to approve somebody else's project just because you approved one before.
Now, how is that not arbitrary?
It's
Yeah.
not
Because of all those reasons
It's
he
not
just-
All the reasons that Bill said.
Yeah.
It's not arbitrary. You can, every piece of property is entirely different. We don't have a field where it's a cookie cutter. That's a completely different kind of parcel than the one that's on the corner where the Corolla project is. You go, no, that's not an appropriate place to put those houses. We're not gonna permit it. It's fine. And that is completely defensible.
So when you talk about it's a different piece of property, what Mr. Luter had and what Vinnie has are 2 different pieces of property. So they should not be treated the same.
Well, it's the same piece of property.
Well, there's a road. There was a road, there's not a road. I mean, there's a road now,
But
so,
it's a
But
road
but
that
he's
we
being
did.
unjustly penalized because of the
Right.
improvements that were made on that property to give access and utilities there.
Right. Yeah, and I think that, in my mind, that the term SUP has become a poison in the townspeople's minds as well, and that's been brought to you all. SUPs are for our benefit, not the developers. But because the public hasn't been educated on that, and they're never going to be, by the
York
way.
has town council.
Right, but because they're not educated on it, they don't understand them. SUPs are tradition, if you want to say that. And if you go with our current zoning, Yeah, maybe there are some things that can be tweaked and changed so that you don't have so many SUPs coming, but you're never, ever going to, I would think you'd never, ever have open zoning so that anybody can come in and buy this piece of land and do this to it by right. You'd never want that to happen.
I don't think any of us are saying.
No, you wouldn't. But to the average resident who don't sit through these meetings, who don't go to the certified planning courses, they don't understand it. And yes, Darren was done a disservice by the man who said, oh, we don't allow any SUPs. Can't remember the last time. Well, but where was that man talking from? What was the neighborhood? You know, we've been encouraged to go, we, the people that went to that program, have been encouraged to go sit through other planning commission meetings. But it's not going to do us any good if we go to one that's for Richmond. It's a completely different kind of ballpark. Do we need to go to Pocosin? Do we need to go to Williamsburg, where things are in a historical district? But most places don't have what Smithfield has. We are still a very special place, and therefore special uses have to be permitted. But I don't think that they should be viewed as a weakness. A special use permit was requested and okay, we're going to give it because we got our arms twisted. No, we gave it because we had a educated reason why to give it. And for Mr. Luter to have bought the 2.7 acres that he did and then put in the road and all of that, his number of houses were notwithstanding that road. Now Vinnie's bought the land, the road's in there, but he's been penalized.
And he paid for the road
And-
anyways.
Right. So it's, again, I don't think that we can see SUPs as a dirty word.
No, I don't think they are. I think they're special and they should be used for special purposes.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right, and it doesn't set a precedent for somebody else.
As
Go
far,
ahead, I'm done.
I was going to say, as far as setbacks, for me, I'll pick on the promontory since that's the most recent in front of me. Going through the single-family homes, he wanted 5 feet side yard setbacks. Well, that means houses are 10 feet apart. To me, that's too clustered, to use my word. I don't like houses that close together. I don't want to walk to my window and be able to read your book. You know, that's just too close. And so therefore, to me, the sideline setback is 15 foot, which is now 30 feet. Well, what's reasonable? And yes, if we enforce our setbacks, that decreases density to a certain extent until you basically have so much land it doesn't really matter. But it does decrease density. And to me, I'm looking at this saying, does this make sense? The 55 and old cottages in Cypress Creek, I think we allowed them 18 feet there. I believe 20, 15, 5 and 10 or something. It's close to 18 to 20, somewhere in there. So that wasn't, to me, unreasonable based on the size of the home that they had said they were going to build and what they were trying to accomplish with that neighborhood. So we concessed on that a little bit. But having single-family homes in the promontory being a 5 foot yard side yard setback is not appropriate, in my opinion, for that development. Now, do they need to be 30 feet apart? Probably not. But I'm not going to tell the developer that. I did, but I want to tell him to come up with a plan that is more reasonable than 10 feet apart. 10 feet apart to me, even though it's not a townhome side by side, it's still a townhome. It's still a duplex. I think they need more distance in there. And so I look at the setback based on where it is. Does it make sense for the location? When you look at the promontory, if you're going to pull the houses closer to the street, does it make, the Grange, do you pull the houses closer to the street? Does it make sense to get them a little closer together to give you that neighborhood feel? Does it give you that downtown neighborhood residential? You look at your house, you're 10 feet off the sidewalk, give or take. You get that sort of homey downtown feeling. That may not be appropriate for Wellington Estates, but I think it depends on that. But I'm never going to push houses closer together side by side. Front to back, I'll give them a lot more leeway for me personally, but not side to side because you keep it open and airy by looking through there. And that's the problem with the battery development is all those little single condominiums are way too clustered together. They're just too dense, too tall, and it's just going to look like a inner city downtown streetscape. And that's not what we're trying to accomplish here. And that's why that's a very difficult subdivision for me to digest, is because of how cluttered it looks. Maybe not how dense, but how cluttered it's going to look.
So in certain situations, what I'm hearing you saying, look favorably on a SUP as a starting point. We'll go back to the promontory. The guy comes in, he says, I want this many houses, and to get that, I need 5 foot, I'm gonna request this SUP to change the required setbacks to 5 feet. So what I'm hearing you're saying, you would look at that and go, nope. Since we already know that you said no, which is a pretty good hypothetical. So your next step and the PC's next step would be, as you have done a couple times already with promontory or the cottages, you need to take it back and look at this again, as opposed to saying right out front, 25 or 15, 25,
Well, we told him that at the meeting.
right.
So he either has to go back, has he fully exploited his net developable area? If he has not, and he's got a lot of amenities and parks, which I don't know if they're bound by RPA restrictions and water lines, but he can still keep 100 homes if he spaces them out, but he's got to decrease his open space as long as he still meets all the requirements. So he'll still keep his density if he spreads it out. But if he's used up all of his net developable area and he's not going to put them 5 feet off the line, then yes, he's going to have to decrease density. There's no other way around it.
But in reality, he can build 150, isn't that correct? Because that's already been.
That was
He can't build
approved.
more
That
than
was
what's
approved.
requested.
As
He
the
can build,
condos.
that's already been approved.
Not individuals.
Not individuals, but as
The
condos.
condos.
They were
As
clustered.
Or
As
clusters,
multifamily.
yeah. the
Right, that's
townhomes.
already been approved.
15, 10,
The number was approved, but
We're
not,
talking about the battery.
not single
The
family
battery, I'm
homes.
talking about the battery. I didn't say that, I'm just saying what's been approved can be built tomorrow, is that correct?
Correct.
Yes,
Okay.
Well, he can build 15 10-plexes, which is
Right.
what's been approved.
Which quite frankly looks a whole lot better than what he has, in my opinion, looks better than what he's proposed as these little individual
Have you all-
homes.
I
Did
think a
y'all
lot
see
of people have
the
said that
proposal
they
we
would
saw
prefer,
The
even though it's
original plan
150.
is the best looking
It's-
plan we've seen,
Yes.
in my
Yes.
opinion.
And I think,
The
and
10 plexes.
Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
for myself, I would prefer to have duplexes, even fourplexes. Look at, say, the villas, they have fourplex. I'd rather have that than townhomes. I don't like townhomes because they're too tall, they appear like a wall, they're too dense. It might as well be an apartment building as well as, as far as I'm concerned.
And we see that at Ben's Grant.
Yes, absolutely. I
plus my
don't,
knees won't take walking up all those
well,
stairs.
that's exactly it. I think a lot of people are to that point where, used to be everybody wanted a ranch house or whatever. Okay, we don't have the width of a lot, but most of them are deep. So you could have a ranch house, but it's deep, it's not wide. So I'm just saying, I would prefer to have duplexes, even quads, versus townhouses, because I don't think it's a good look for Smithfield. It doesn't fit in.
But unfortunately, and this is just an economic thing, but that tends to be the entry-level housing for people. That's where young people kind of start.
The problem is, all the townhouses that are being built now, they're $400,000,
Well,
you know?
The one, you're right, the one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All
They-
the
they don't
ones that are
have to
coming
be-
in, the Grange, the Promontory, they're all starting out at
but
400,000.
I guess you're right about what's been proposed, but typically though, that's the entry-level housing for young people in townhouses, because it's what they can afford, because it's less, cost of development, less money.
Well, and I'm saying, that's what I'm saying, you could have a smaller lot that are 2 and 3 bedrooms, 1.5, 2 bath, you could have a smaller house. I mean, I look at all the houses that are along Wilson and Magruder, even on South Church, they're smaller houses, they're smaller lots. That's a nicer look than a bunch of townhouses.
Yes, if I may. I want to not repeat everything that the participants have said, but I may say something that's not popular, but I hope it's practical and understandable. But I think Dr. Pope, Tammy, Mike, Attorney Riddick have explained these ordinances and how they're used. And to be clear, some people think, and it's been said, that SUPs and waivers are dirty words. They're not. The ordinances themselves, overall, is what binds everything together. What gives us the flexibility is the SUPs and the waivers. And that is what you apply to each individual application as they come before you. Nobody's going to ask for the same SUPs and waivers on the application. It depends upon the application, the location, and their request, what they're asking for. So what is done for one development certainly may not apply to the next development. And that's the concern I keep hearing about, well, you did this for this, and now you got to do it for that. No, you do not. The SUPs, if you look at them, they're there because there may be 30 different buildings that's not allowed by the general ordinance, by the overhead ordinance. It may not be allowed, but if that's what a developer wants to put in, there may be 30 different choices there that he can ask through special use permit. It gives you the flexibility to put a building somewhere, any type of building, a business. It gives you that flexibility to put it there if it suits that neighborhood well, if it suits it. If it doesn't, again, you can simply deny the SUP or the waiver. You have to look at the application individually. Individually. And I think that's where a hang-up is at. It's on the merits of that particular application that the special use and the waiver is requesting on that application. And I give you an example. Setbacks. You brought up setbacks. Okay. You asked, there are setbacks in the cottages on Battery Park. There's a waiver request for setbacks there. There's also a waiver request for setbacks on the Grange. It sounds like they're asking for the same thing. But if you look at the lots that these things are placed on and the application, they are quite different. They are different. If you look at the Grange, not the Grange, but the cottages, well, I'll start with the Grange. The reason for the setback request on the Grange was he wanted the homes, the residential homes, to imitate downtown historic district neighborhoods, particularly along Grace Street and perhaps Cedar Street. Those homes, is it Cedar? The one behind the...
Carey?
Over there by Trinity?
No.
Carey Street?
No.
Carey?
It's
No.
Cedar.
Well, you can say Cary, but Cedar, okay? Cedar's the one that runs parallel to Main Street.
Yes.
Right.
It does.
That's
It
okay.
does.
Okay. Those homes are, I think Dr. Pope said, maybe 10 feet. They have a setback of 10 feet. They have a setback of 10 feet. So when the Grange came about, the developer is trying to imitate your historic district, so he requested a waiver of setback to make it look like 10 feet, to look like Grace Street, to look like the houses sitting on Carey Street or Cedar. That's why he requested that, okay? So on the merits of that application, it's fine. Now, you go to the cottages, which is not near the historic district. He's asking for waivers of setbacks there. That's totally different. It's totally different. It's totally different character. The surrounding neighborhoods are totally different than the ones downtown. It's out of character. And then again, you have the power at that point. He's asking for those waiver of setbacks. You can simply say no. Separately. based on the merits of that application. It doesn't copy anything in town. It doesn't imitate anything in town. Based on that, you can simply deny the waiver for the setback. So it really doesn't apply. The power is left with you. The flexibility. It's left with you. And that's the purpose of the special use permits and the waivers. It's not because, oh, he did it, I can do it. No. Those choices are yours. And that's where you can fulfill your citizens' interests. That's where you can fulfill it at. The campaign promises, no growth. I'm not sure that was ideal.
I need to correct that statement. It's been made a couple times tonight.
Well,
there is not one of us that is no growth.
Okay. And I prefer controlled growth, okay?
And I think that's what they said.
Yes, but the impression is, and I hear from, citizens and writings and stuff, there's no growth, okay? That was out there. But again, you're looking back at specific application. The specific application, what is the developer or the applicant asking for? That's where you make the separation whether you approve or deny. That's where that happens at. No one's taking the power from you. The Community Development Planning Department, the applicant comes in, he makes the application, this is what I want. They go through it, this is what is required to get it to the Planning Commission. They apply what changes are going to be needed to amend the ordinances, what changes are going to be permitted or required to make it fit within the parameters of getting it to the Planning Commission. Okay? That's one step of filtering out what the applicant wants. Okay? When it gets to us, we're looking at it on the merits, not with a political lens, but on the merits of the application. That's what we're looking at, on the merits of the application. And if we're doing our job at the Planning Commission, we are going to hopefully give you a product that benefits the town and give you cover from looking political. Promises. We're giving you something based on the merits. And that could be approval or denial. But it's based on the merits. And if you trust us to give you something good, I don't think it has to be redone over and over again. The whole process doesn't have to be over and over again discussed. It shouldn't have to do that. And we're at this point now where people are asking, well, what about this and what about that? Oftentimes, those things have been considered, and they have little consequence to what the benefit of a development would be to the town, what it's bringing. And the other things, proffers. Applicants are bringing different proffers. That weighs on the decision, whether it's approved or not denied. Okay? Mallory Point, they profit a lot of things to the town. They profit a lot of things to the town. You look at Vinnie's project. It's different. You can't apply what Mr. Luda did to his current situation now. It's different. When Mr. Luda had it, there was no complete clay street. You have to adjust your analysis of it because it's now different with a different owner. The town has a street. The owner, I think, deserves some credit or some relief from the requirements previously that Mr. Luda had to go through. And he's adjusting it. He's adjusting it. And I didn't compare the plans of what Mr. Luda did and what Mr. Corolla was doing, but I would take a guess that what Mr. Corolla did, minimizing the cutouts on the curb cutouts for driveways and individual units, I'm guessing that he reduced those well, quite well. And it's a better plan, quite well, because now you only have 2 cutouts. One on Washington Street and one on a new Clay Street, instead of having driveways for each unit that's facing the street. So there are some advantages, there are some things that's been done to improve that application that has to be considered, and I'm not sure they are being considered. I don't think they're being accounted for. One other thing I want to say, the 0 lot line. Not to pat myself on the back, but the questions you're having now, I voted negatively on that proposal because I was concerned about the density that it would provide, the additional density that it would provide. But I understand the other side of the argument. Sprawl. If you keep building out, your infrastructure becomes that much more costly. That becomes a problem. That becomes a weight on the town's finances. So if you're not going to do sprawl and you need to increase the number of homes or businesses, then 0 lot lines provide relief for that. But I would caution someone who may tear down a house, a single house, let's say in the historic district, and then come back and request 0 lot lines to put 5 houses on that same lot, I think that's something that we should really address, not to permit that. They can ask for 0 lot lines on an empty lot, which is happening at the parks on James or Clay Street. That's an empty lot, so I can understand the use of 0 lot lines there. But to tear down a home in the historic district just to use the 0 lot line, that I think we should address to address this issue of everybody doing that and increasing the density of the downtown historic district be so much more than it currently is. You're still trying to protect, you're still trying to maintain the character of it. You're still trying to maintain the character of downtown. And there was other things, there were other points. I think Mr. Sarling brought it up yesterday's meeting. The other difference with the Grange and the cottages, traffic, there was foot traffic discussed about no one goes beyond the 300 block. That's another merit for the Grange. You put something on the other end of the street on an empty lot, visitors, tourists, they got more things to do. They would spend more time here. They would travel down there. If there's something down there for them, they would do that. And that traffic would go back and forth, back and forth. It'll benefit everyone. That's another difference between the Grange and the cottages on Battery. But, yeah, I agree with everything that, well, not everything, but they've done a good job. Yeah, I'm gonna be careful about that. I'm not gonna say everything. But they've done a good job explaining what's happening with these ordinances, the SUPs, and the waivers. Apply them individually to the application. And SUPs and ordinances, it tells you what you can do with an SUP. It's a limited number of types of buildings and businesses that can go in an area under the top level of ordinance, but if something can be placed in a particular area, they can do it, they have the flexibility with the special use permits. Okay? And there can ask, somebody may want to put a hospital in there, they may want to put a medical center in there, they might want to put a retail office space in there, they might want to put a gas station in there, they might want to make a special a convenience store in there, maybe a small senior care facility, a church. That's what the SUPs are for. They're not dirty words. Those SUPs are there to give the developer applicant flexibility about what they can put there. And you can always say no if you feel it doesn't. If you feel it doesn't, you can always say no. You still have that power. And I will end it there. I stopped lecturing. I will end it there. So thank you.
I want to shift gears for a second. Something that gives me a lot of stress and something I lose sleep over. When are we going to apply consistency across our entrance corridor overlay districts? I know we might have a monetary thing of 50% of a building's value to say we have to trigger, but what gives me a lot of stress is when are we going to enforce our ECO guidelines to the fullest capability when these places across Church Street and things like that are going to be ultimately be sold and remodeled and redone? Even though we might not, if a place is valued at $250,000, but they're going to do a $100,000 renovation, okay, we don't quite hit the threshold that we've adopted, but when are we going to hold these people accountable for full compliance of buildings and things like that? Because and I'll pick on Mr. Walls because he was at the Planning Commission. He made some significant improvements, some great improvements, paving the parking lot, which has been a big pet peeve of mine, but it's done some great improvements. But when would we trigger to say he now has to come into full compliance with everything? When are we going to stick to that? Because it seems very haphazard, and it creates a lot of stress for me to think of when does this trigger for this person, but not for this person, for this person. And I think we need some consistency, and I think 50% of a house value, land value, or total value is very generous, and I don't know if that's a good guideline to go by. I don't know if it needs to be a little more restrictive. But when you look at the houses as they're being dated in front of the Supreme gas station and moving on down, a lot of those places are dated. But when somebody says we're going to take it over, when do we make them come into full compliance? That creates a lot of stress for me of how to address that. Because I don't want to discourage smaller businesses. I don't want to discourage people from doing things. But at the same token, we do have an obligation to stick to our ordinances.
I'd like, before we get too far down, that's kind of our next discussion point. I'd like to put a bow on this density
I think we're already down into all of them.
SUP thing, if we could. I think if you all would keep an open mind about SUPs and we approach it in a way, I think Mr. Harris said, show why it's necessary and how it benefits the town. I think if we can put that lens on it and make them really make the case for the need and the reasoning behind it, I think we'll get closer together.
Yeah, and I think that Michael did a good job the other night of talking about, it must have been pulled out from different things over the years, and there's really no organization. There was some comments from Darren about they were elected officials. They didn't do that willy-nilly, but at the same time, things have changed. And I do think we need to get to a point where we can come to common ground on this and have something that they can really go by. And the other thing I want to reiterate is I actually spoke to John Napolitano before he ever did this development. He's had that piece of property for a long time. What he told me was, and his people that he knew had contacted me, he said, Mike, tell him what you want to do, and he will do it. So we need to think about, just because he's asking for it, we don't have to grant it. We can go back to him and negotiate those things. And that meant a lot to me that he was, and he has. He's been very cordial about what he's done. He's truly a professional, there's no doubt about it. He's done things we haven't asked him to do. But you get developers that are not, Michael and I have talked about this, get some developers that are not, they're a little shady, if you will. I don't want to be calling them that, but they'll do whatever they can get by with and not, but if we give them a direction, they're going to work with us. And I think right now, Vinny, Mr. Luder, all of them are trying to work with us. So I just feel like that it's all a give and take situation, and we have to understand that we're not going to get everything we want, but we can meet a common ground. And I don't want us to be getting not along, because it's important that you do your job, and y'all do it, y'all have done a good job. I mean, I don't wanna sit there. I really don't. I mean, it takes a lot of heat, and then we give y'all more heat. I know you don't feel good about that, so we're not here tonight to argue, but try to see what we can do. And I agree with Dr. Pope talking about the compliance thing, and what do we do with that? You know, that could go on forever and ever. You could have a small business in one of those houses and not do anything forever. You know, there's a lot of things, with the rebuild that might come down to Church Street with the extra lanes and all that. You know, like I said, this town is growing, there's no doubt about it. But once again, it's a small little space, and I think we all want to protect it and do the right thing.
And I think
Yes.
that leads us well into our next item. You know, we have something that came up in particular about Red Point.
Yeah.
And you actually sent them to us for an SUP, which I find a little ironic based on the discussion we've had previously. But we've had mixed emotions about that. At least I have, and I knew Mr. Pack did when he was on here, and Mr. Cutler and I were in alignment on that at this last vote. So where is the tipping point? You know, they did say they were going to do it, and we've kicked the can down the street. You know, how long do we do it? But we don't want to see another business go out of business as a result of this huge expense.
Right, and that's a good point. Sometimes I think we haven't been clear enough as to what the consequences might have been when they said, we'll hook to the water. You know, I hooked to the water too, but I didn't know it was gonna be $30,000.
Right.
So I see where that gets complicated. So sometimes I think we fail in giving them the right information to go forward on that, so.
I want to comment on that while you're talking, while you bring that up. I think, especially as you're talking to Red Point, I think maybe the initial process was not handled appropriately, not only by the town, but the owners themselves. I think they went into it blind. I don't think the town had the proper information as well. And this goes way before anyone that was, you know, it's before
Right.
Tammy, Michael, you know, before everybody. Another thing that, so in that sense, and I've spoken about this, I was in favor of giving them the SUP and not requiring them. Another big reason for that is we have a historic building. And just like on Grace Street, we have ordinances, or down, not just Grace Street, downtown. We don't we have waivers, however you want, for like the porches. You know, we don't necessarily meet current standards for, I'm going to lose the word. Not the setbacks. So like, for example, a porch, many of them don't have railings, because that's how they were historically. So I think in the case of Red Point, we want, or any historic building that's in town, we want them to stay a historic building. We don't want historic buildings torn down. We want to keep them. That's part of Smithfield. That's who we are. So we want to protect those historic buildings. So if that means that we give them special use permit, we have some special granting them exceptions to certain rules, that helps to keep the historic nature of our town. So that's where, now, where do we draw the line if the house is built in 1950 or not? You know, I don't know what other houses are on Church Street necessarily. But certainly in the rest of downtown, we don't want people to come in, buy 2 or 3 houses and knock them down. We want to protect the old houses, the old buildings, whether they're businesses or homes or whatever. So I think that's why I felt strongly about Red Point, is that yes, they did some renovations, whatever the costs were. It doesn't seem like they met the threshold. I think that they, like I say, I think they and the town did not have good information from the beginning, so that's why I would be supportive of the SUP. I also think they could have come down and knocked down that building That building's 100 years old. So the fact that they're repurposing it, reusing it, and it has been a big boom for that neighborhood. And I think we need to support businesses especially that do that.
Let me give you a different perspective. I'm a business owner. I took a huge risk coming here. I still don't know why Farmers Bank gave me the money they did. I'm glad they did. They trusted me. But Shannon and I were way over our heads. You know, I had Dan Smith build our building. He told me things were going to be great. He guided me through the process. He knew the process. And here I am today. I took a huge risk. I knew the risks that were involved. I didn't know if I could do it or not. They were defined the risk. It's not up to us for them to go do their research for them. They have to come up with their business plan and figure out what they need to do. Going through that property, we granted them multiple special use permits and waivers, and after the fact waivers and special use permits in order to keep them compliant because they built too close to the property line. They needed to have an outdoor refrigerator. It needed to be covered with the roof. There were lots of exceptions on that property, and I would venture to say 7. And probably 4 of them were after the fact, maybe 3. I might be exaggerating a little bit.
No.
They knew what they needed to do up front. They accepted it, and they chose not, where they're asking now, not to comply with what they had done. That's a big difference of them, of the town going back to them 2 years later and saying, you need to hook up. This is also part of this ECO guideline of when buildings are not in full code compliance, they have to be brought up to full code. And I'm sure that that's what this issue is all about. This building needs to be brought up. Putting a water line under the ground is not going to destroy the historic nature of this building, and you're never going to see it. But they knew all of the things that were involved. I wish Mr. Settle had said, you need to do this before you actually open your business, and we wouldn't be discussing this today.
Well-
But all of these businesses, all of these places, any places that are going along Church Street now and any other places in town that are not in full code compliance, whether with water, sewer, electric, all of those things tonight is part of how hard are we going to push these folks that they have to bring into full code. And
But
that's
at
what
what-
this is what this comes down to. They agreed to do this, and they're asking. I don't think it's going to enhance their business to be on there, but they have agreed to foot the expense for every other business that comes in behind that.
But at what point do we, and I understand where you're coming from. I mean, I obviously was not involved in all the different scenarios. But would you agree that when we're dealing with a historic building, that's different than, well, especially a new build, but even a remodel of something that's not so old? Like I said, and I keep coming back to the downtown. I mean, there are things with the houses downtown where we are not up to current codes, if you're going to say it, in terms of building codes and stuff like that. We're granted a waiver because we're in a historic district. And so I think we need to give other historic buildings the same.
But they're not in the historic district.
Well,
correct?
they're historic building. They're a
But-
historic building, though.
But even our historic homes, if they are, well, this is unique because they're not serviced by a water line. But if there's a building downtown that is not serviced by a water line and somebody's going to do a significant improvement, then yes, they should put the water line in, period. If that's what the town requires, they should do that. In that sense. And every building should. We're getting ready to go through the historic district for lead, right? And so all these buildings have to be changed over for lead pipes and things that are existing downtown. And that's going to have to be fully compliant because that's a federal law issue. But all these places have to. That's the whole point of sticking to these commercial developments. We have more say in commercial development than we do in residential. But absolutely, every building should be in full code compliance with water, sewer, electric, and the things that the town requires in that sense. And then plus our ECO guidelines. But when are you going to make them institute that? The difference in this situation, and the hang-up of it is they agreed. That's the big difference.
And the town did come to assist them because when they checked on the price, it was like $70,000. Tammy said, let us check with our vendor. So that reduced the hookup to $30,000.
Well, and I think they were also told that they could hook up to the vet next door, and that
No,
didn't work
they were
out.
never told
Okay,
that.
but the
Never-
town
never.
did not agree to
Never,
that.
never.
That's between them and the next door neighbor, if that occurred.
Well, that was never an option because it is
Yeah.
not a viable, for what they need, that was never an option that was offered to them.
Right.
Tom, I've got a question. There's 6 other homes on that well. What do you do with them?
Well, as long as they stay residential, nothing.
Okay,
But
so
as
how do
soon-
you monitor their sewage? Do they have meters on that well?
That I don't know, but as long as they're residential, they're grandfathered. But as soon as you take that to a commercial property, then they need to come into compliance with code.
So if somebody buys one of their homes, it still falls under the free water, right?
As a
Right.
resident.
Yes,
Residents.
as a residential.
Well, if I'm a lawyer and I open it up and want to put my law practice in there, then I think they're going to have to hook up to town water, because that's a commercial use of the building.
Or Airbnb?
If they're going to do it as an Airbnb and
Right.
get outside of the 104 days of their
Yeah.
grandfathered or their by right,
So-
then that now becomes a commercial property, and then therefore they need to hook to the town because that's the
So the question I asked
code.
you was, are they monitored by HRSD?
No, they're not monitored, and I think the tap house said that they pay a nominal fee that HSRD and the town have agreed upon for their sewage for right now, but we don't know if that's accurate or not.
They have a meter. And that's how
They just
pay
put
that.
they just put a meter in,
Right.
It just-
HRSD,
And
right.
HRSD has a minimum rate, and then, like you mentioned, in this case, they required them to put a meter in since they're a commercial establishment.
And they flew under the radar for a while with that as
They
well.
did.
Yeah.
Right. My issue, I guess, is I love the tap house. I certainly want them to stay in business. It's never been about that. But you have 3 men who are businessmen who bought this property. They closed it down to make all these renovations. They would have what we would presume to be a business plan for all the contingencies that they needed to take care of. This one got by them. So they were told they needed to do it. They said, okay, we'll do it. Can you grant us a 2-year extension? We did. They came back and said, we still can't do it. Can we have more time?
Too much money.
Yeah, it's just too much money. And that's the thing. They agreed to it when they opened, before they opened. They agreed to it 2 years later. At what point do we say, you're just not going to do it?
At what
And that's where
point
we are.
And at what point shouldn't they just have been grandfathered in? That's my opinion.
That's not
I mean-
that's not an option.
For one thing,
They're
they're commercial.
They went commercial.
But
And
that building
renovation.
has always been commercial. I mean, there's been beauty salon there, dog grooming, they use a
Right.
lot of water. They've
Well-
only owned that building for 5 years.
But
Yeah.
they knew what
They
they were
updated.
getting into,
Right.
and then they came back and
But why
said,
the sudden change of heart with the town?
there was
I-
no change of heart with the
But
town.
5 years ago, I mean, we were still enforcing these
Just
same
to
rules.
clarify, it was part of their rezoning application that they promised to connect because they had
Oh,
to
that's right.
rezone the
Okay.
property
I stand corrected.
in order to operate.
But that goes back to the point of every other future development that has to come into full compliance. Now, this is unique because they don't have water lines. I'm assuming a lot of these places on Church Street have water lines, and that's not really going to be a future issue. But it still comes back to how much are we going to enforce and when? And is our 50% value is going to hold, and is that a reasonable thing? When does it become unreasonable? Let me share my little thing because this costs money. I'm in the process of doing a 900-foot renovation. I've spent $18,000 to get to this point. About $9,000 of that is architectural fees, which is no merit of the town. But I did a traffic study at $3,000 to count traffic on my road. And I also had to do a bunch of surveys, which again is not at the town's expense in the sense of that, but it's costed me $18,000 real dollars, and I haven't broken ground yet. I can't imagine what Mr. Luter has paid for a conceptual plan, surveys, and doing this. And I'm just adding on 900 square feet at $18,000 out of my pocket. And I don't quite have my building permit yet. And I've been over a month getting a building permit. There's real money involved here, and we have to look at that and keep that in mind. I don't care if you're a multi-million-dollar developer or you're a small business person like myself. $18,000 is a lot of money for us to put out to get to this point, and this process is very difficult, and very expensive. And we need to look at that and remember how we're impacting all of these businesses, impacting these individuals' livelihood, and that they're investing their hard-earned money to get to this point for us just to sit here and say, no, this or this, because there is a real, I'm not saying we need to say yes just for that reason, but we have to be very cognizant about how much money we're spending of other people's money. And so it's very difficult. We put out a lot of money. Some of it's not at that, but it's just a lot of money that goes out the door. And that's $18,000 for me at a 900 square foot addition. I agree. So I'm just saying there's real dollars involved here, and that needs to be kind of kept in mind a little bit. I think that there is money going out. But so with that being said is what's fair? And when are we going to make all these businesses come into compliance? It's easy if you're a new build. It's easy if you're a DMV in the new place because it's raw land. You got to build it up. You got to have a site plan. I was quoted $55,000 for a site plan to $35,000 for a site plan. Couldn't do it. That's in addition to the 18 I've already spent. And luckily there's a workaround because of, what was it called? Minor site plan. So there was a workaround for that with our business. But luckily we worked around it with Tammy and Mark to get around it. But I would have spent 55 to 35 plus 18 to do a 900 square foot addition to my building. So when we look at Mr. Walls and say, hey, you hand drew this picture, you look at the insurance agent right across the street, Mr. Hughes, and he wanted to pave his parking lot. Luckily, we need to allow some doodling on paper to allow some of this stuff to go on, be a little bit commonsensical of what we require. Why would we make Tractor Supply do a full site plan, full elevations to do their little sunroom addition that they asked for 4 or 5 years ago that they've never built? How much money did they spend on that? I mean, yeah, they're a large corporation. Maybe we should or shouldn't be involved, with their expenses, but there's a lot of money going through the door there before they ever get approval, before they ever get in front of us. And that's a tough pill to swallow sometimes.
You're singing my song. I mean, I don't think we should be putting these onerous costs or regulations on small businesses especially. I mean, we need to go out of our way to help small businesses.
Well, some of the things that are required are not driven by the time, they're driven by storm water.
Yeah,
That's the biggest,
That's state,
anchor on
yeah.
everyone, and it's state, and that's mandated by the feds, and it's just, you can't get around some of that stuff, and so, I mean, she's not sitting here going, I'm gonna make these guys spend a lot of money. That's not the case. It's okay, we've got to deal with the stormwater issue, and that requires engineers and calculations and all that kind of stuff. It's ridiculous, but hopefully things are gonna change, and maybe 10 regulations get suspended for everyone that's adopted. That'd be okay with me. We can throw away, 9/10 of this book, that'd be great, but that's not where we are right now. And she's, I've been doing this a long time. I can sit on both sides of the table because I do rezoning work at the county, and it drives me crazy. And the thing that I've always hated is when you walk into any locality, and the first thing they tell you is no. That just makes, and Mike, you know that how
You
know
and
how
I've
that
been
is.
through that. We
And
have.
your head will spin.
No, yeah.
And the answer should be, municipal government should always be, well, we're happy that you're here, and we want you to come to our time, and we have rules, but let's see if we can't find a way to get what you want within the parameters of our rules. And that's the way, that's public service, I think. And we try to do that. But it gets, some things you just get bogged down in the weeds, and it's not anybody's fault. It's just what it is, particularly these big developments. Tom's situation, that's just kind of ridiculous. It shouldn't cost that much money to stick a 900 feet on the building.
Yeah, so how do we fix that? Tom and I talked about this a little bit previously, just because, know each other. What is the process? How do we clip the weeds? How do we get rid of some of that stuff that the town controls?
Well, maybe we sit down and try to do that.
That's what I'm saying. What does that sit down look like?
Well, I guess we all get in the room and see what, we get in the room, okay, we get in the room and see what we can do and what rules and regulations that we can shift to the minor site plan situation. I don't really know, because Tammy deals with more the nuts and bolts than I do, but, I mean, look, I represent lots of little business people too, just like Tom, and they all complain about the same thing. It's so expensive to do anything.
I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt you.
Make sure, I'm hearing that we all need to make sure we need to talk into the microphones.
Right. Again, for those of us that have just been elected, we have talked about this a lot. We would like to pursue whatever it is to chop those weeds because collectively, we are committed to making life easier for small business in Smithfield in any way that we can. You know, the guy's got an already existing building, he just wants to put another room on it. And what, you haven't thrown a shovel in the ground, and what are you at, 35?
No, I'm only at about 18 right now.
Oh, only about 18. 2 years of
Well,
teaching.
but some of those fences are not town-related, it's architect and us, but
Right,
it's still a fair amount of money.
But still,
no
there
matter
are
what.
things, you know, and of course, Mike can probably speak to this better. I have several friends that are builders. You know, years past, you walked in, it's yes, yes, yes. Now it's no, no, no. Not particularly here. Most people do say, you know, we're friendly, we try to do that, but we get bogged down the developmental projects, and, you know, and all of this stuff, and Mike and I have talked about this before. There is a ton of stuff that we need to do for the citizens of the town of Smithfield, small businesses and individuals. So we can't just continue to be absorbed by dealing, you know, with the building things. And I don't know how to get over that again, being the new guy, but Michael, Tammy, anyway, you know, set up the committees or bring us all back together and let us begin to look at whatever regulations there are that we can help folks.
So we do try to utilize whatever, you know, hand drawing or illustrations. A lot of times with additions, especially on commercial property, it's difficult because we have to identify the setbacks, and if you don't have a survey, then you do need to get a survey. Additionally, a lot of the other costs come at the building permit phase of projects, where we will accept the hand-drawn decks, but then Isle of Wight County needs to have, you know, them engineered and prepared. So we're juggling with what they require versus what we require, but we do try to make every accommodation that we can.
Is there, again, not pointing the finger, completely out there, and none of us are really experts on, is there wiggle room in the filing costs?
Our filing fees are nothing.
Nothing at this point. Okay.
That's not the big chunk of the money.
It's a balance because, you know, ECO guidelines, the point of those is to make the entrance to town look presentable, look beautiful, look uniform, and that costs money. So, you know, you have to balance how much do you want that versus how much do you want it to cost for somebody to do something. With the businesses, it's, again, how much do you want to just, how much control do you want versus how much do you not want? Because anything that we want as additional controls is going to cost that individual money because they have to go and do extra things and bring extra things to council. When we go back and forth 5 or 6 times on iterations of plans, that costs them money. And so it's a matter of that balance. How much control do we want? How far in the weeds do we want to go? And knowing that that's going to cost money. It's just, we have to find that balance, and we can't have ultimate control and it not cost somebody additional money. And we also don't want to give up all control just so it costs them less money. We have to find the balance, and I think that's what Mr. Pope was asking on the ECO guidelines. How far do we want to go? Because there's no point in having them if we don't use them, but no, it's going to cost money to do it. You'll hear, you know, sidewalks, for example. Well, that's one that's always there. You know, people who, the ECO guidelines require you, let's say hypothetically, to put a sidewalk in front of your business. Well, it doesn't connect to anything. You know, so that's a cost, but it's for the long-term benefit. So how far do we go with that? I mean, if you go down Route 17, the State Farm Insurance Agency that's there, there's been a sidewalk in front of that building for years that connects to nothing. But it's because of the long-term vision.
Exactly.
And so, I mean, they fought. I'm sure they fought putting in that sidewalk.
I represent them.
Yeah. So, you know, that's what those things are there for. And it's just a matter of you have to decide what's most important. Is it most important for the entrance corridors to look beautiful and presentable? Well, if it is, then it's going to be expensive for somebody to do business in town. If it's to make it inexpensive, then you got to get rid of that stuff. You can't do all of it, and it's up to, thankfully, it's up to you guys to make the decision on what that balance is, and then we go enforce it.
Right, which takes me back to my question. How do we become better informed so that we can make better decisions? Is it time to have that conversation again? Is that part of our retreat? Can we have a work
Well,
session?
what
I mean,
I-
right now, if just say something came before everybody next Tuesday, well,
Yeah.
at least three of us don't know. You know, we're just
What
gonna
I
sit
will
there.
say is, there's 3 of you that have only been here, it's 2 months now.
Right,
You have to realize that it's going to take you probably 2 years
right.
to fully get that. I mean, we're talking about the historic buildings that being torn down. Our historic guidelines don't let you do that. That's already there. And unless you've been through that, I mean, you would have no way to know that. So some of that is just going to be, it's going to take you a long time to digest everything that exists. And that's what we're here for. I mean, we've done it, and so ask the questions, and we'll be glad to help you. But again, it's up to you guys on the policy level. How far do you want to go one direction or the other, and then we'll go do it. But
And again, I know I can speak for all the newbies. Both of you all have been extremely cooperative and supportive in answering all of our questions, as well as Laura and everybody on staff.
Yeah.
That's not the issue. But if I can go back to what Tom said, that's, again, citizen first, now sitting on the table. The lack of consistent enforcement on those type of situations is, to me, something we definitely need to get a grip on and be consistent and in a timely fashion. I don't know,
Well-
again, how do we get to that?
I don't know if we've had a lack of consistency.
right.
I just worry about what are we going to do as these properties present themselves? Because what's going to spur commercial development is rooftops. The more rooftops and people you have, then that's going to spur more, I don't know, whatever Chick-fil-A's and McDonald's consider themselves, but those types of commercial things starting to come through. And that's all, but then we need to make sure we're dealing with people on a consistent basis. I don't think we've not been consistent. I'm not thinking we're intentionally inconsistent, but I think it's going to be an issue in the future of how hard do we push a renovation. If it's an empty lot, that's easy. But if it's a renovation or an addition, how much percentage do you need to change? How much expense do you really need to say? Is it based on expense? Is it based on square footage? Is it based on, I don't know the right answer. I don't know what's fair. I think a fair way to somewhat deal with it is in Chick-fil-A calls up Tammy and say, we want to put a building up and we want to tear these 2 buildings down. We want to know how much to do. I think it might be fair for her to say, well, we want to present the concept to the planning commission before you actually start putting pen to paper to say, how much are we going to require? If the hair stop wants to do something and they want to do an addition, do they want to present the concept to us before they make them start doing site plans and traffic studies and surveys and say, does this make common sense for what they want to do? And how much are we going to require them? If they want to level their building, then that's a different issue. But I think they would have to sort of be our barometer to say, wait a second, let's take a step back. This doesn't make sense. Let's give it to them before we get too far into this. That would be my gestalt on that.
South Church Street is a really difficult problem because it was annexed and it was such a mixed bag in there. There's, you got the bank and you got all the little small modest homes that have been there many, many years. And Mike's brother Dan was on the planning commission, and we wrestled with that for just months and months and came up with, it's still in the zoning ordinance, the residence office district, and it only applies to that section of South Church Street. And the idea was to come up, we wanted people, we knew it was gonna evolve. And people, and it has, you've got the little music shop and the insurance and all kinds of little things along there, but there's still people that live there. And so the idea was you had to make it reasonably affordable for people to convert it to commercial because we knew that was going to happen. But now we're at the point, okay, what do you do? Do you, have you gotten to the point where you've got to take a harder line? And I think that's what Tom was talking about. It was designed to encourage the transition, but now maybe it needs to take another step. And that's a decision for you to make. That's why y'all get paid the big money, is to make those decisions.
But with Church Street going to change and ultimately go to a 3-lane road and a bike path that's going through there, I mean, there's going to be a lot of changes that come whenever that gets funded and whatever y'all are with that process. But then when that changes, then that's really when the commercial side of that is going to change.
Right.
And that's when we're going to expect, are you going to pull the buildings closer or make it more walkable and go through all those key terms that they went through with the comprehensive plan, or what do we do? And that's when it's really going to trigger. And so I just want to be prepared for that, because it stresses me out to think I'm going to look at Mr. Walls and say, you're going to pave your parking lot, put a little deck on the back and a roof, but yeah, you got to spend $65,000 to get a site plan to do everything. That gives me heartburn, and I don't sleep at night over that. But when does it become fair? It's not an answer for tonight.
Right.
But I think we've got to think about it. One other quick thing. I mentioned this at one of the planning commission meetings. When we look at our proffers and we look at things that go on with these developments, it's tied to occupancy permit. The town is not in control of occupancy permit. It's the county. We're in control of zoning permits. So when they say in Mallory Point that you have to build 200 homes and then the pool's going in, and you can't get your 200th occupancy permit until the pool goes in, it should be tied to zoning, not to occupancy. It's really hard to look at the developer who's got 15 homes ready. You can't sell them. You can't give them to the people that have bought them because they have occupancy permits, but yet we're over. What really should happen is you can't get any more zoning permits from the town, because then you can't build a house, you can't put anybody in it until they start to comply with whatever their guidelines are. I think our ordinance, or our whatever the right word is, needs to get rid of occupancy and go to zoning, because we're in control of zoning. We're asking the county to enforce something that we've agreed to. And that's too much of a disconnect. That's what happened in Cypress Creek. That's why some of the things didn't transpire that were supposed to transpire. I think we really need to look at zoning permit, because Mr. Clucks would be able to look at this and say, you're on 812 homes in Mallory Point and you're on 213 zoning permit out of 812. And then whatever the triggers are, that's when they say, don't forget, you've got to put the roundabout in, you've got to put the pools in, you've got to put the clubhouse in. We're in control of zoning, not occupancy. And then the last comment I've got for my agenda is proffers. In order to prevent what happened in Cypress Creek, I'm going to ask the developers as we move along, if they're going to put 34 trees in, they're going to put 34 trees in the proffer, they're going to put 6 benches, they're going to put a walking trail, they're going to put in whatever they're going to put in. Because to me, the conceptual plan is what you should build to, and they aren't building to that. And if the conceptual plan is not a legal document, the proffer is. And so I'm going to be very specific and say, I'm not approving this until the proffers are completely written out and we're in final form before we vote. Because the proffer is the legal statement, and we should not be passing that along and hoping it gets fixed on the back end. I'm going to be asked if that's going to be fixed on the front end, if that's legal and allowed to be
And
done.
we learned a lesson on that. That has never happened before. I mean, we never had a developer not do exactly what they said they were going to do. And in this case, they had a drawing, and it showed little things that looked like barbecues, and it just wasn't specific. And so they got into this tug of war, which has been resolved.
Yeah,
It has been resolved finally. It was all about money. But anyhow, it's been resolved. But we learned a lesson, and as Tom just said exactly, from now on, if you're going to proffer it's a recreation area, it's going to say, 37 trees and barbecue grills and a bocce ball court and all that kind of stuff. It's going to be in writing, because
If it's in writing, who monitors that? Who makes sure that 37 trees have been planted?
she does.
Okay.
And can we do that now, or does this have to just going forward? I mean, does this apply to Mallory Point? No, you can't do it, okay. I'm not using them as an example, but I'm just
We
saying.
don't have that issue with them, but
No, I'm just any, ongoing, so from here on out,
Right. And procedurally, what we've discussed internally is when Planning Commission sees a final site plan, you will also see the conceptual plan. And so that way, when you bless the site plan, you are saying it's in substantial conformance. Because that was part of this issue too, is the site plan that was approved had some of those amenities on it, but didn't have everything that was on the conceptual plan. So when Planning Commission approved that final site plan, in theory, you were saying it's in substantial conformance. And I mean, and they built the pool and fitness center, which were the two things specifically called out in the proffers. So legally, I think you were probably right. But the HOA was latched onto a conceptual plan that showed a different thing than what was on the final site plan.
I don't think anybody should be giving us a conceptual plan if they're not gonna build to it.
Well, and
Because that's misleading us to think that we're gonna
Right.
put in 150 trees and you're only gonna plant 5 in the end.
And I agree, and the argument, though, that I had was, for example, the conceptual plan showed a pool that was a kidney bean shape. Well, if they build a square pool, you know, how nitpicky do you go in that, right? So that way, if you have the conceptual plan and the final site plan side by side, and you're okay with it being a square pool instead of a kidney bean shaped pool, you know, that's a judgment call you can make. And, you know, it's, if they need to change the shape of the pool because of some site condition they found, then you can make the call that that's okay. But then you ultimately are blessing it, and you have those two documents to make that call based off of.
It was a landscaping plan too,
Right.
and that was approved as well, so.
So there were a lot of things that, you know, legally were okay, but just, they kind of fell apart in there.
So Michael, the question that we would have, what I'm hearing Tom say is we need to change our ordinance.
He is recommending that we
That
use,
can be done in the process.
right, that we use zoning permits. And to his point, when we sign off on the certificate of occupancy, so they won't get one. But what I've seen happen in the past is the builder is done. They know they've called their final inspection. They've gone ahead and started closing on the house. And then we can hold the CO because they haven't done something. Now, they've sold a house, the buyer has it, can't move into it. So ultimately, that's all on the buyer or the seller because they didn't do what they were supposed to do. But it puts another individual in the middle of that gets messy.
And the reason it's always been tied to occupancy permits is because state law ties the proffers, the payment of cash proffers, to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy. You can't collect the proffer until the CO is issued. And so that's, but there's nothing that would say in the future with respect to like triggers. We can have triggers for improvements in our proffers, and we can say, no, those can't be tied to certificates of occupancy, they're gonna be tied to the zoning permits.
What we would prefer is to tie them, especially for phase developments, is tie them to site plan approval of an additional phase. And that way, we wouldn't be tracking zoning permits. It would be easier for us just to say, at the commencement of when you're ready to go for Phase E, you need to have, for example, for Mallory, you have to have all of your right-of-way acquisition before we're even going to approve that site plan.
And this would be in writing.
Yeah. The problem is they may propose like 5 different phases, but you don't know exactly how many units are gonna be in each one of those phases, because they might come back and tweak that a little bit, and they're still within the density and so that's why it was tied to numbers, but there's no reason we can't tie it to phases.
But it makes us as the town look bad if we're saying you can't move in, you're buying a house and you
Right.
closed on it, you're paying on it, but yeah, we can't move in because we're not issuing the occupancy permit because the builder hadn't done what he said he's gonna do. You know, it is on the builder, but it makes the town,
But
the government as
It
the
looks
enemy.
bad, yeah.
I've had to do that before, and it's not a pleasant conversation.
Yeah.
And just so, the cash profit thing, y'all, I'm sure, did you hear all about that when you went to the zoning workshops?
Let's start on it. It's our next session.
That's, well,
We'll be on.
pay attention, because it's, nobody understands that. It's not designed to, it used to be, basically it was coercion.
Right.
You either, at the county, you either pay your $11,198 per unit, or you're not getting your zone. And
Right.
it was, and they didn't come out and say that, but they almost said that. And it was an understanding, and the law has really changed the other way. But it's not that you can't accept them, but your capital improvement plans have to identify things that you can accept money for. And the schools have to have a need, and that's the biggest problem. And we've had a hard time with the school systems getting, I cannot tell you how many times we begged them numbers about
Yes.
this. Trying to determine whether they need to pay for, cash profits or not. And it's a moving target, and getting, it's important, even though the money doesn't come to the town, we're all county citizens. And we want them to pay their fair share for schools. But if we don't have the tools in order to require the developer, the information to require the developer to pay it, we can't accept it legally. And that's a real problem.
One last comment for me, only because I have your attention. I'd like to just future planning roads, looking at the safety corridor in front of our office, Gumwood Drive and all this. I mentioned it to Tammy. Really, it's a VDOT issue, but y'all have the authority if you talk to them. I don't know if this spacing works, and I mentioned it to Tammy, but I think VDOT owns the property beside the fire station. I'd like to see them move the Church Street intersection to there, get rid of the Gumwood Drive intersection and move it to Josephine's Crossing behind CVS, and then see if stoplights work out, that they're the correct spacing between Kroger, now Josephine's Crossing, and Church Street if you move the entrance down, especially in light that there may be a development going across the street at the old Horse Hunter's Way. But if they're talking about doing intersection improvements there, would that spacing make more sense to allow for stoplights and slowing down traffic and through that corridor? Because I think there's been at least a couple of deaths in front of our intersection.
That's terrible.
So to me, that would make sense. The last road improvement that I wish y'all would consider in your budgets and stuff would be to extend Gumwood Drive as you go down to the apartments and take a right to come back to Canterbury Lane, where Mount Tabor Church owns a piece of property through there, and consider putting a road between Gumwood and Canterbury to allow that little section with the development that may or may not be coming through to access stoplights, all depending on what VDOT does. But those little road improvements I just want to throw out there is to keep in the future plans of whatever's going to happen to Route 10.
I got two pieces of history, so I want you to know, because it came up tonight. Cypress Creek was rezoned in 1987, and it was done, and they put the golf, it was done 2 years before the Chesapeake Bay Act was adopted, and they put those golf holes in, which they couldn't do today because they're right on the water. But that was 1987, and now it's 2025, it's 38 years, and it's still not finished, which that's, everybody thinks that if something's approved, it's like mushrooms and then crop up.
Right.
And that's really not, you have to plan long term, but that's just like the longest example. I mean, 38 years, that's incredible. But, and then the other thing was Mallory Point. The town invited the owner of that property to do what he did. We were the ones who initiated the annexation of that whole Scott Farm. And different people sit in your chairs, but that's how that all came about. It wasn't, we actively recruited that. So, it was never a surprise. Now, what went there, that was all a decision for the council to make. But, truly, that was always seen, the last annexation, the big fight was over Gatlin Point. And because the owners of the land was on the board of supervisors, the Scott Farm didn't come into the town. And that was the only reason, it was politics. And it was like a big donut hole right there. And the town always says, well, we own the water line and the sewer line, why can't it be part of the town? And so we initiated that. So it's not always, evil developers coming into the town to develop the property, because in this instance, the town said, that makes sense to do that. So, it's, how it evolved and what ended up there, that's completely a different story, but that's how it happened.
With that said, I know we've had a lot of town council comments and planning commission comments, unless Tom has some more things to say.
I'm exhausted about
I
this.
do want to appreciate y'all for coming out tonight and explaining some things, and hope we can continue to work together to make this a better community. If there's nothing else to be said, I'd like to adjourn this meeting.
Let's Tom has